This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
We've had a good lunch and a reasonable break. And just on a little piece of housekeeping, can I ask that those who are making comments and, or questions, asking questions to the floor, that you speak as clearly and as loudly as you can, because I know from experience of taking transcripts of the audio file, there's a camera here, that it's quite difficult sometimes to identify what people are saying in the back of the room. And I'm also asking our three panellists here to use the lectern, because we have, again, for purposes of the record. So I don't need to introduce in any detail our three panellists. Steve Cutts, the Assistant Commonwealth Secretary General, is well known to you, as is Vijay Krishnarayan, the new director of the Commonwealth Foundation. I'm not sure what the cut-off point for calling you a new director is. You're probably still within time at the moment. And of course, Wright, many different Commonwealth manifestations, but at the moment director of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. And for this session, I hope that each of them will give a very informed, of course, and experienced, but a rather different perspective on these matters. We were talking this morning, Amitabh Banerjee came back, as one would expect, very firmly that the Commonwealth was not in crisis, and I think that question is going to run through the day's proceedings. But one of the people who most have the responsibility for making sure the implementation is going to be credible and is going to reach the results that we'll want is Steve Cutts. And so his view is going to be very important. The Foundation has been through a period of some turbulence and is now in the process of relaunch with a new strategic plan, and Amitabh is obviously driving that particular, and Vijay is driving that process. And Carl, from his perspective, is an organisation mentioned this morning. You had one or two honourable mentions, CLGF this morning, Carl. And obviously, organisations like CLGF have a particular interest in how this new relationship in terms of the Secretariat's strategic plan and the Foundation's strategic plan is likely to operate. But I hope there will be other people from other organisations who will be able to join in that discussion. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Steve to speak to us.
Thank you, Stuart. I will stand up here as asked. And the first apology I'm going to give is that I don't have a polished presentation. I've spent the morning with many of the board of governors of the Commonwealth discussing indeed what I'm here to talk about this afternoon, which is the new strategic plan. And I think I'll start by also what I started by saying to them and say that the new strategic plan, this strategic plan, hasn't taken place in the usual format. There have been a number of things different about this process. I think the first one I'd mention is that back in 2009, the heads decided that there should be a very far-reaching and overarching review of the Commonwealth as a whole, and it mandated the establishment of the Eminent Persons Group. And I see we have two distinguished representatives with us today. And this was a group that met on numerous occasions, together with the Secretary General and others, and I was privileged enough to take part in that. And it was a group that, in its final report, came up with, as I'm sure you all know, 104 recommendations for the consideration of leaders at Perth last year. And I think, and we all know also what happened then, is that the leaders, there were a certain number agreed, there I believe it was 30, there were a number that were referred to for further consideration of financial implications, although they were agreed in principle. And then there were certain others, including the Charter, including the proposal for a Commissioner on Democracy, Human Rights, and democracy, human rights, and rule of law, and those were referred together with many others, to a process which was set out by the heads. And that process by the heads included having a senior officials meeting, which we had in around April this year, a ministerial task force that was established and met in June, and then through to recommendations coming out from the foreign ministers, which only met, I think, in September this year. And that process is still not yet finally complete, whilst the vast majority of the recommendations have either been approved or improved with comments and some qualifications. The final endorsement of the heads of government is only taking place at the end of this month. And as such, the intergovernmental process, it's not that the Secretariat has run it slowly, it is actually that was set down by the heads that we have gone through. So I think after the end of this month, and I'm going to obviously disappoint people by saying I'm not going into details about what the recommendations of the heads are at the moment, but after the end of this month I would anticipate that we can make public statements about exactly what the heads and the members have agreed and have not agreed. One of the areas where separately we had a slightly separate process. I'm not going to talk about the Commissioner proposal because that was on a totally separate track through the CMAG, and maybe Amitabh would have touched on that this morning. But one of the areas where there was a separate process set up slightly was the charter process. Now, the agreement by heads was that there should indeed be a charter for the Commonwealth, and that there were two important caveats. One, that it should be based on previous declarations, and the second, that it would not be legally binding. And I think that the Eminent Persons Group, in my discussions and listening to the Eminent Persons Group, I always understood that the real purpose of the Charter was that it was intended to engage the Commonwealth, hopefully engaging the broader civil society and citizens of the Commonwealth in terms of its genesis and how it was developed, to make people feel, raise awareness of the Commonwealth and actually involve them in that process. And I think that maybe hasn't happened to the extent that we would wish. And I have to say, from the Secretariat point of view, we did try very much to really encourage the member countries to have their national consultations. Separately, the Secretary-General, of his own volition, said apart from the national consultations which were mandated by the government, we did also encourage any input to come into the Secretariat, and that was more successful. I think we received, probably many people in this room and others, we received a lot of input from civil society, and that was conveyed to the members as they then went through the intergovernmental process. And indeed, the Charter itself, I think as you will see, and as many of you may have seen from other drafts, actually reflects, in a way, what the organisations were calling for, which was quite a different shape document than we had. So that is the process, that's one process in the way we've been seeing through, and I think from a purely bureaucratic point of view, we'll judge the result, it's been quite successful insofar as there is a consensus, unless heads overturn that consensus, there is a consensus on how to treat each of these EPG recommendations. But that has necessarily had an impact on the planning process for the strategic plan. The usual state of affairs would have been a strategic plan which would have been developed, frankly starting in the latter part of 2011 for endorsement by the Board of Governors in their meeting in 2012. Now, given the far-reaching and fundamental nature of the EPG recommendations, including the impact they would have on the Secretariat if accepted, and they said in most of them, in one form or another, I think are going to be accepted, I should say, it really didn't make much sense to develop a plan in too much detail before we actually took those on board. And at this stage, and I think that partly explains the reasons why, maybe from an external perspective, not much has been fed out to the broader world about the strategic plan at this stage. What I can say is that the other thing that's been different about the strategic plan is that it was mandated by heads to be a top-down process. In the past, the plan, and I certainly took part in that or led an interim review of the previous plan, it was very much a kind of bottom-up exercise, as in both within the Secretariat and with the members, what they wanted to see. The heads mandated a top-down exercise where the Secretary-General in particular would identify what he saw as being the core strengths and the comparative advantages of the organisation, and would try to build consensus around those ideas going forward. And I think one of the real bywords, and this was a recommendation in the EPG, but something which members have been asking for many years, is to say, look, given your resources, which frankly in today's world are not going to change significantly, given your resources, you are simply trying to do too many things. And there is a frenzy of activity from the Secretariat, but you're not necessarily able to show that much impact. You would be able to show better impact if you were more focused, if you did things deeper, if you did them better. And I think that is something today that we have tried, and we are trying to very much take on board with respect to the plan. We have gone through a number of meetings. The Secretary General designed a process for getting us to this stage of the plan and for getting agreement. By nature, as you all know, he's a very, very consultative person. He held discussions with all of the High Commissioners. He has met with some of the people in this room, parts of civil society. He went through an intensive exercise in the Secretariat, listening to people in order to develop his ideas of what should be the plan. And those have only emerged relatively recently. And the process we're going through now is trying to get the consensus on the plan and work on it. This morning, as I said, we met with the governors, those who attended, and in cases where it wasn't the High Commissioner, we had other people from the delegations. And I think it's clear that there is a recognition that we need to move quickly, but it's also clear that there's still a need to build a consensus around some of the ideas. I think everybody agreed. I think I went to all the lunches yesterday we had with High Commissioners, and there was universal agreement that we need to be more focused, we should be doing fewer things. There was far from universal agreement on what those things should be, and that is always the challenge when you're dealing with countries that value the Commonwealth for different reasons. I think that, and I'll be honest, this is a personal view, I think that we haven't yet communicated well enough that the areas which the Secretary General is proposing to do differently, downsize, the other organisations, are ones where it would be very difficult. It's very difficult to envisage that the Commonwealth has a real comparative advantage, where the Commonwealth can actually demonstrate impact, where the Commonwealth has that real track record of achievement. And in fact, when you look at some of the areas and you look at what other organisations are doing, that's where I think the sense is. That's why I think the SG is saying, well, those are areas where we really, it's not that we should abandon the very important issues, but there may be ones in which we have to work differently and leave some of the work that we're currently doing to other organisations who can do it vastly better than we can and have a much better track record. There are certain other principles which we're following, and I can talk certainly about the strategic plan. It's not just about focus. It's also about results-based management, and everyone's heard that for years, and I think people get confused, and they think it's a very complex management process. To me, it's always been very simple. Results-based management means whatever we do as an institution, and this must guide everything in the new strategic plan, whatever we do, whatever project we do, whatever intervention we make, we have to be very clear up front what positive change we intend to come about as a result of our intervention, as a result of our project. It doesn't matter how small the project. And then we have to be very clear, knowing up front, when we design that project and that intervention, we have to know how it is. We will know whether we're achieving that. And that is all there is in terms of setting your objectives, setting your indicators, and then monitoring that. And that will enable us to report back to government, as we must, report back the difference we're making with taxpayers' money. So far, we've not done a very good job of that. We tend to report a lot of activities, we do a lot of one-off workshops, we do an awful lot of activities around the world, and we're very seldom able to articulate really what difference we're making in member countries and for members with the work we do. If that continues, there's only one way for the Secretariat, and that is downwards in terms of finance. Because the member countries, and it's not just the usual donors, the member countries won't fund an organisation if they cannot perceive that we are using their money wisely and making a difference with it where it really counts. I think, I'm not going to say too much more, I think that all goes to the heart of things that are in the new strategic plan. We have a much stronger monitoring, evaluation and reporting framework. We are aiming to work more closely with others, and I think there is some confusion about this. I take the view that we should, wherever possible, be working with civil society partners, and I see Carl is going to say a few words in a minute, working with them to see where they are better placed to deliver outcomes than the Secretariat. But even if that weren't true, I am one of the people who will be sitting up here passionately saying, even if that weren't true, even if there weren't people who hopefully can take up our work and we can be encouraged to take up our work to do it better, we will not have the impact we should be having as an organisation if we continue with such a vast work plan and frankly duplicating the work of others with better resources both human and financial, to do the work. And I think it's against that framework that we're going forward. Now, the process and the timeline going forward is a bit uncertain, because I'll be honest with you, we don't yet have a consensus around the ideas. We're going to, today we had a meeting with the governors, and I think there's still a lot of confusion and still a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about some of the ideas. I think there needs to be a process now where that consensus is built very, very quickly. The intention is that there will be a document sent out to the governors next week for a meeting towards the end of the month on the 27th of November. And I think the SG needs to also communicate some of the misunderstandings that are on the plan in order to overcome those misunderstandings. Because it's vital we do build a consensus for what will be a more meaningful plan which benefits all the members going forward. The timeframe does matter. We have already let the timetable slip. When I spoke to many of you before, we were talking about an implementation date of the 1st of January. We're now talking about an implementation of the date of the 1st of July next year. I have to say where we are now, I think it's, in retrospect, it was a very wise move to do that. I wasn't party to that decision, it was made in New York, because it's not just a question of getting agreement and then implementing the plan. Once we actually have the agreement, or very close to it on the plan, and we know we're going to get it, there are then some very serious things that need to be done in the Secretariat. One of which is to look at the structure. The structure is not optimal, it doesn't reflect already, in my view, the best way to deliver the current plan. It certainly, if we have radical changes, isn't the best structure for moving forward. That takes some time, it takes some consultation, and it obviously creates a certain amount of angst amongst the staff and the Secretariat. You can't really rush that too much. Separately, we have to be doing a thorough review of our corporate support. Currently, around half of the resources in the Secretariat are actually on the backroom services. Now, partly is because we're a very small organisation and these things are not relative, but I am certainly convinced that we can do things better, more effectively and efficiently, and frankly release some resources, because as much as possible we should be pushing resources into doing the main work of the organisation and delivering the results which have the benefit for member countries. It's not just the member countries who want to hear that. I actually believe, by looking across these areas, that that is a fact. I don't think I'm going to say much more than that. I'll leave it to others, but that's kind of where we are, and I'd be happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I know that people who are asking about the Charter, and I'm glad you mentioned the situation as far as that's concerned. Vijay, could I ask you to speak?
Thanks very much, Stuart, and thanks to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to present a little bit about the Foundation's new strategic plan and the way we've interpreted the mandate that was given to the Commonwealth Foundation to relaunch this year. I want to do three things for this presentation. First of all, just tell you a little bit about the background, the approach that we've taken to the relaunch, how we've interpreted the relaunch, so the context of the relaunch, firstly. Secondly, explain to you why we've chosen to focus on our central theme of participatory governance. And thirdly, perhaps spell out the kind of approaches that we'll be taking to rolling this new strategic plan out. This session makes an explicit linkage between the strategic plans of the intergovernmental organisations of the Commonwealth and the eminent persons group process. I think it's worth just stopping to take stock of exactly what that nexus is. For the Commonwealth Foundation, it was very clear. I think both the process and the content of the final EPG report reflected a desire and an acknowledgement of the importance and centrality of civil society to the contemporary Commonwealth project. Daisy will tell us how many civil society organisations contributed to make submissions to the EPG process. It was hundreds, no?
Over 300.
Over 300. But also in the title of the final EPG report itself, there was a clear reference to the importance of what we used to call the People's Commonwealth. Both the process and the content and the presentation of the final EPG report squarely acknowledge the importance and centrality of civil society to the Commonwealth. That's one thing. Now we, at the Foundation, were obviously interpreting that and interpreting this new mood, and it was confirmed at the Perth Heads of Government meeting when I know all of you have committed the full communique to memory, but so I won't have to tell you that paragraph 9C of the Chobham communique makes explicit reference to the Commonwealth Foundation being given a mandate to relaunch in 2012 as an intergovernmental organisation in order to better mobilise civil society organisations in pursuit of Commonwealth principles and priorities. So it resonated very clearly with the outcomes of the EPG process. Now, of course, relaunching an organisation is a huge challenge, not least for an intergovernmental organisation. So it required us to stop, pause for thought, and deconstruct this concept of relaunch. And we did that in three ways. We broke it down into three things. Firstly, we revisited our constitution. Now, the Commonwealth Foundation was initially established as a charity under English law in 1965. It hasn't always been an intergovernmental organisation. But interestingly, some of the language that persisted in our constitution had survived from 1965. So this was an opportunity to bring that language up to date. We also took that opportunity in our constitution to enshrine the concept of civil society participation in the governance of the Commonwealth Foundation. The Commonwealth Foundation is unique in several ways in the multilateral intergovernmental landscape. But one of the key ways in which it is different is that it makes provision on its board for representatives of civil society organisations. That was never actually codified in our Memorandum of Understanding, and the opportunity, the moment of relaunch, provided us with the excuse, if you like, to make sure that it was properly institutionalised. So that was the first thing we did, update the language and bring civil society squarely into the picture. Secondly, of course, we revisited our corporate identity, our visual brand. We took the opportunity to revisit our values, and we've come up with a new identity. That's very important for us, not least of all because we're making a much bigger play this time round of an online presence where the ability to communicate your ideas very simply and straightforwardly is ever more important. So a new visual identity, a new brand for the organisation was very much part and parcel of the relaunch. Perhaps the most important element of the relaunch, though, was the strategic plan. And I hope most of you will have had a chance to see a copy of it. I've got a one-page summary of it here, which I'll make available at the back of the wall afterwards. But in that, you'll see that we've placed governance at the heart of what the Commonwealth Foundation will be doing over the next 4 years. So why have we chosen governance, and in particular participatory governance, as our focus? Well, in our analysis, governance and governance are two different concepts entirely. And in the Commonwealth context, we expect our countries, Commonwealth countries, to be not to be ruled as such, but to be governed by a mix of government and civil society and market players. That's the central hypothesis. In a participatory governance context, we understand that that will require dialogue, interaction, exchange between those different stakeholders. We want to place the Commonwealth Foundation at the disposal of both civil society organisations and government institutions in helping to facilitate that exchange and dialogue. It's as simple as that. We recognise that that interaction and exchange will result in better development outcomes. That's why we're doing it. We also recognise that policies on their own won't deliver this. We recognise that institutions on their own won't deliver this. We recognise that capacities on their own won't deliver this. But that combination, that blend of institutions, policies and capacities will make and improve the context for participatory governance. Now, we haven't come to this conclusion by accident. The Commonwealth Foundation has been working on citizens' engagement in governance systems and structures for a long time now. The start, if you like, was the presentation to the 1999 Chopper of a piece of research undertaken by the Commonwealth Foundation in 47 Commonwealth countries, which interviewed 10,000 Commonwealth citizens on the nature of what we then called the good society. Now, the conclusions of that research demonstrated that citizens, Commonwealth citizens, felt there was a clear need for A, governments that were receptive to civil society inputs, but B, civil society organisations that had the capacity and wherewithal to make representations to governments. Ever since that research was presented to the 1999 Charter, the Commonwealth Foundation has always had, as part of its programmatic work, a corner that's been reserved for governments, and we've interpreted that in various ways over the past 15 years. We've chosen to focus on participatory governance, A, because we've got this track record, this history of work in encouraging citizens to have their say. We've also chosen this focus because we know that this builds on the relative homogeneity, if you will, of institutions across the Commonwealth. There's a tradition of institutions being open and receptive to citizen inputs. We want to build on that. Thirdly, of course, we want to use this opportunity of governance as a cross-cutting thing to touch on the gamut of development challenges that Commonwealth citizens are facing. We at the Commonwealth Foundation, we have a staff of 20 and an annual budget of 3 million. We do not have the capacity to develop specialism, education, health, environment, food security, migration, or any one of the issues that civil society is knocking on the door of the Commonwealth with. But in our analysis, the concept of participatory governance and the idea that citizens should have the wherewithal, the capacity, the opportunity to have their say on those particular issues is something that we think we can help with. So those are the reasons why we chose to focus on participatory governance. In terms of our approach and how we've interpreted participatory governance, how we're going to be taking it forward. Essentially, we see participatory governance as a question of supply and demand. On the one hand, government, institutions, private sector organisations increasingly are the organisations, the institutions that are defining the parameters of governance. That's the supply side, if you like. So on the demand side, citizens' organisations, individual citizens, social movements are demanding greater participation and visibility in governance structures and systems. What we want to do at the Commonwealth Foundation, for the first time perhaps, is address both supply and demand. If you look at the way in which the Foundation has worked throughout its history, since it was established in 1965, arguably we've invested the majority of our resources, if not all of our resources, on the demand side. We have consistently supported civil society organisations, primarily through our grant-making processes, to exchange with each other, learn from each other, and present their concerns to governments in one form or another. For the first time, of course, we'll continue to do some of that, but increasingly you'll see in the new strategic plan that we will be addressing the supply side as well, providing help and assistance to governments that they open up to and more receptive to civil society inputs, whether that might be by sharing models of good practice in terms of NGO legislation, or helping specific institutions in any particular sector engage with civil society players. So that's the first characteristic of our approach, if you like. The second characteristic of our approach is, Steve referred to, results-based management. Now, we've been talking and thinking about results-based management for a long time in the Commonwealth Foundation, but we've chosen this moment to really grasp the nettle. And so we've taken advice. We recognise that we don't have the expertise in-house. We've borrowed some expertise from colleagues who are also providing technical assistance to colleagues at the Commonwealth Secretariat to see how we can apply that to the Commonwealth Foundation experience. And so we have, if you look at the plan, you'll see for the first time the commitment to meeting specific indicators, whether they be qualitative or quantitative, in relation to improving this interface between governments and civil society. It's not going to be easy. And we also recognise in going through that process that we don't have baseline data. So the first year of the Commonwealth Foundation's implementation of the strategic plan will in large part focus on scoping the landscape for participatory governance to enable us to develop this baseline of data so we can then chart the progress that we make throughout the rest of the course of the life of the strategic plan. I think the other corollary of embracing a results-based management approach is that all of our resources are going to be aligned behind the key outcomes that we've identified for the organisation. Now this has real implications for example, the way in which the Foundation makes grants. We will not now be giving grants for willy-nilly projects that are good and valuable in and of themselves. This results-based management approach requires a certain discipline in the way that we deploy our resources. And it will mean that there will be colleagues, organisations that have come to rely on the organisation for grants in a particular way. It will need a re-evaluation of that relationship. The third characteristic of our approach is, I think, that it is an incremental approach. We have recognised, I think, that we're not going to immediately stop doing things that we have been doing for such a long time and suddenly take a new path. We recognise that to effect change, we have to recognise that change is a process, and that we have to review the commitments that we have made already, pursue those through to a conclusion, and then start again. Revisit those existing commitments in the context of the new strategic plan, and at the same time proceed with our new direction. That means, for example, long-standing projects of the Commonwealth Foundation, like the Commonwealth Wright Prize, something that's very, very close to our hearts, needs to be reimagined in the context of participatory governance. Now that's not an easy task, I can tell you, but we can start to reimagine the Commonwealth Writers' Prize being used in and of itself as a prize, for example, to a situation where we start seeing literature and written expression as a manifestation of people's right to express themselves, their right to participate in society. That's the new narrative that we'll end up giving to the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, if it is to exist in the new strategic framework. It also means that our relationship with Commonwealth accredited organisations is going to change. Because we have this focus on participatory governance, we're going to encourage colleagues in the Commonwealth amongst the Commonwealth associations to see themselves in this project and encourage them and support them to come and see and join us on this journey towards achieving participatory governance across the Commonwealth. Now, we don't imagine that that's going to be easy either. We've taken the first steps towards doing that by instituting a working group that will help us to explore the ways in which we can provide support through that transition process. All of this tells you that change is not easy. We've had to make difficult choices at the Commonwealth Foundation, but I'm delighted to say that our member states have been behind us all the way. The support that we've had from government making these changes has been incredible, and it's been across the board as well. We have talked before in this forum, I think, about some of the divisions within the Commonwealth family. I've been struck, I have to say, by the unanimity of support across member states for the path that the Commonwealth Foundation has chosen. Arguably, there's more unanimity amongst governments for our project than there is within the civil society community. There's an irony there. Perhaps I'll leave it there and present that as the Commonwealth Foundation's strategic plan.
Thank you very much, Vijay. And now to complete the trio, if I can ask Carl to speak.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. And maybe by way of introduction, good afternoon, and acknowledging also the presence, of course, of Senator Seagull and Sir Ron, I just want to demonstrate I do actually have a copy of the report with me, and I think there's one thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I think it's rather important, which is the title of the report. I just want to draw your attention. This is the EPG report, sorry, which I'm referring to. First of all, it's called the Commonwealth of the People, or Commonwealth, which is not just the Commonwealth of the Commonwealth Secretariat or the Commonwealth of Governments, but a Commonwealth of the People, which I think is a very intentional choice. And then the subtitle, I think is equally relevant to our agenda today, is Time for Urgent Reform. I notice the word urgent in the title. So just to demonstrate that I have the report with me. But let me just say, what I'd like to do in sort of 5-10 minutes, Chair, is talk a bit about my organisation's strategic planning process and what we do and how that relates to the discussion today, then address what I think are some of the relevant issues of concern, and then come back to the issue of this particular session, which is what's new, and perhaps also add what's next. So let me start a little bit introduction about the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. I guess we fall into that sort of rather strange third category. We're not an intergovernmental organisation like the Secretariat, but equally we're not a civil society organisation like many others in this room. And the reason is that our membership comprises governmental bodies. We have elected local governments and local government associations, which are elected bodies by and large. And we also have national ministries of local government as our members. And that's reflected in the board, which I'm responsible to, in which we have senior ministers and senior mayors. So we're clearly not civil society, but we're not intergovernmental. So we fall in this sort of grey area, which was referred to this morning, I think, as the area which is generally deemed Commonwealth associated organisations, which have several rights and responsibilities, and get accreditation at the CHOGM. And I'll come back to that dynamics. Vijay's talked about how civil society relates to the Commonwealth. I'd like to talk about how associated organisations like ours, and because there's others like the CPA, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which has the same status, would relate, in particular in the context of strategic planning and some of the things Stephen has mentioned about the new Secretariat's strategic plan. We have a strategic plan, call it our business plan. And what that tries to do is very much focus on the issues that's already been raised, which is results and outcomes. We're not in the business to be just there to have lots of nice activities to promote the niceties of the Commonwealth, wonderful as it is, but we're there to see some benefits for our members. And basically our work and our focus on our strategic objectives focus on two core areas. One is the promotion of local democracy and good governance. Of course, that brings us back to the debate we had this morning about human rights, CMAG and all those issues, because we feel that the right of representative local democracy is just as important in many ways, if not more important, than national democracy, because if you don't have the grassroots representative structures, you're going to have trouble at the national level. So promoting local democracy, good governance and all that entails, whether it's gender, whether it's issues around transparency, whether it's accountability, interface with civil society, all those issues are very much core to our work, and our success is measured on how effective we are, what results we achieve, what outcomes we can get in those sort of aims. The second area, which I thought perhaps wasn't mentioned quite so much this morning, should have been mentioned more, is development. And of course there is this great debate, should the Commonwealth only focus on democracy? Should it only focus on development? Where's the balance between the two? I think sometimes there is perhaps a bit too much of a tendency to only look at the democracy objectives, and of course that's what the Commonwealth, as we know, is quite good at in many ways. But of course, equally, a lot of developing countries, certainly my members in the developing world, would argue we're also there to serve developmental objectives in a broader sense. And in our case, again, I come back to the results issue. That means very much achieving better services, water, sanitation, a lot of core services which are done at local government level. Now, obviously, a small body like ours, we have about 20 staff and a budget about the same size as the foundation. We can't achieve a great deal of that kind of resources and that kind of staffing, but what we try and do is to enable our members to do things. So we don't try and pretend that with a very small amount of money we have, we can achieve huge things ourselves, but we actually see ourselves as an enabling organisation working with our members. For example, having a better system of decentralised governance. Let me then move on quickly to what I think are two key issues we should look at this afternoon in the context not just of the Secretariat, but all Commonwealth bodies, including my own. And I think we're very, first of all, I think I come back to the issue of having a greater results focus. And Daisy, I think in the paper which is circulated, made some reference to the DFID critique of the Commonwealth Secretariat, and I think that's a critique that of course applies to all organisations, not only the Secretariat, that we have to have more focus and more emphasis on what we're best at. So clearly that is perhaps the number one issue. There's also a second issue, which I certainly come across in my work in the Commonwealth over the previous years, and that's the issue of having more joined-up approach between the different Commonwealth organisations, whether it's the CLGF, whether it's the magistrates, whether it's other Commonwealth bodies, both associated and civil society. And I think I've just come back from the Solomon Islands, long trip, so I'm a bit unjoined myself. That's probably the reason. It's something like 2 o'clock in the morning, my biological time. But I think when you go to all Commonwealth countries, whether it's the UK or the Solomons, people think of the Commonwealth as the Commonwealth as the Commonwealth. They don't make a distinction between the foundation, between the Secretariat, between the local government forum. And I think often we forget that there is much more unity of purpose among ourselves than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. And what I think has happened in the past is there hasn't been enough joined up coordination among Commonwealth bodies. And I think that's an issue which the Eminent Persons Group very properly and rightly addressed as something that needs to change. So those are sort of 2 key issues, I think. The need for greater focus on results-based management, and secondly, more joined-up approach among Commonwealth organisations. So what is new? What's been new over the last 12 months or so since the EPG was tabled at the CHOGM? Well, I think, first of all, if I stick to this area of joined-up Commonwealth, I think one of the key recommendations from our point of view, and I would like to again acknowledge the role Senator Seagull and Sir Ron played in this, was recommendation 87, and I quote, the Commonwealth Secretariat should coordinate its work with associated Commonwealth institutions at annual meetings convened by the Secretary-General to draw on their technical and other expertise so as to avoid utilising expensive external consultants, where possible, reduce in-house costs. The Secretariat should allocate funds for which these organisations can apply to implement programmes for which they are better suited than the Secretariat. So I think that was a very important recommendation, and I was very pleased that it was agreed immediately at the CHOGM in Perth last year. Now in response to that, I'm very happy that Stephen convened a meeting, I think it was in March, thereabouts, with associated organisations, where some of the issues about coordination were addressed. And indeed, Stuart, our chair, was commissioned to do a report which addresses not just the issue of the associated organisations, but also the civil society organisations. And I commend Stuart for that work that he's been doing on that. So I think that particular recommendation has been taken up quite seriously. But of course, ultimately, the proof of the pudding is in eating. And I guess we're waiting to see what the strategic plan will say, Stephen, exactly on this, and perhaps you can enlighten us further, but I know we've had some positive discussions already. And of course, ultimately, it comes down to the practical implementation and how we actually take forward that joined-up approach, and that approach which is more strategic, which is more outcome-focused in all our cases. Perhaps in conclusion, I can just throw up a few ideas as to what's next and where we might go in this area. Certainly we have been enhancing the cooperation. I mean, with Amitabh's department, we've worked always very closely, and in the past year we've done a number of initiatives, including being facilitated to make a submission to CMAG at the last meeting, which incidentally put the case for keeping the Maldives on the Commonwealth agenda, because we were very concerned about issues around local democracy, not least when the Deputy Mayor of Mali, who came to one of our meetings recently, told us he'd be beaten up by the police, which is not exactly a very good way of dealing with human rights and democracy. So, but certainly we feel that at the political level we've had very good engagement. We're having a collaborative meeting on Pakistan, where we have great concerns about the absence of elected local government in that particular country. So I think there's a good joined-up approach there. We've also had some other joint activities, including on Sri Lanka, including on a number of other areas, such as East Africa, where we did an event a short while ago, which was designed to help the local government structures in East Africa interact with the responsible regional body. And a lot of our work is also facilitating our members to work at the regional level, whether it's the level of CARICOM in the Caribbean, or the South Pacific and the South Pacific, or indeed, in this case, the East African community. But let me just throw up some final ideas where we go next in terms of the area I'm responsible for, which is CLGF and associated bodies, I guess. We'd certainly like to have a more standard arrangement with the Secretariat, maybe an MOU, maybe some kind of agency status, something which would give closer and clearer recognition, because what's important is to get away from purely personality-based relationships. These things need to be institutionalized and not just rely on good relationships between individuals. We'd certainly like to see a clarification of our status at CHOGM and at ministerial meetings, and the High Commissioner for Trinidad has left, but at the last CHOGM he certainly supported, his government supported the idea of organizations like CLGF having the ability to report to foreign ministers in a more formal way. And I'm sure there could be ways of enhancing that reporting ability. Incidentally, the CPA, which is the other associated body which represents democracy, if you like, also doesn't have that ability to report directly to foreign ministers, which we would like to see. Maybe there could be ways of having reciprocal representation on our respective board of governors, and then having more close interaction, at least in certain agenda items which are relevant. And indeed, of course, something I've been discussing with Stephen already, having a more practical engagement in the strategic planning process, so that we actually feed in and plan things together more jointly and do things in closer collaboration. And of course, I should say we also work very closely with Government Institution Division of the Secretariat, and I've been pleased the way that relationship has been developing in recent months. But ultimately, I guess, what the Commonwealth needs is to be able to demonstrate that it can achieve concrete things. It mustn't pretend to do too much, but really focus on what it's able to do. And if I can slightly, in conclusion, plagiarize Daisy's paper, and I think she makes 4 very key points, that now I would apply this not just to the Secretariat, Daisy, but to all bodies, including my own. We should discontinue work where we have no comparative advantage, such as shared values, common history, global challenges where we can give our role as influencer, advocate, and or convener of political networks to advance solutions. Secondly, where there is no comparative advantage, we should only continue work where we have a uniquely distinguished and demonstrable track record. Thirdly, we should discontinue work where there is an insufficient critical mass of resources to make any impact. And finally, we should also discontinue work where there is little or no demonstrated impact. And while that perhaps all sounds a little bit technical, a little bit nerdish, I think that's the way the Commonwealth needs to move forward if it's to have relevance, and if indeed is to achieve, as the EPG has said, urgent reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. That was very useful, and I think we've had 3 excellent presentations that have brought together a number of very important issues for us, whether we're representative of organisations here or just representing ourselves. If I can try and sort of put my finger on a few of them, I think one of the problems is that our kind of knowledge of what is of the change that is underway is only partial. We have to accept. It tends to be compartmentalised, to have a sense in which the foundation are proceeding along one track and the Secretariat on another. And quite understandably, the Secretariat, both organisations, are under huge pressure to deliver very tight time frames that are pressurising them all the time. And one gets the sense that it is only now and then the lights are switched on and that others can see what is happening within the process. So I think there is a difficulty there, that although we perceive a widening out, a more inclusive partnership in future between the governmental and the non-governmental, it's not necessarily the message that we're receiving in any specific way at the moment, and maybe that's because we need to move one step further on, I'm not sure. There are issues I know we'll want to address about narrowing the focus, and it applies as much to the foundation and, for instance, the state of art and culture, very important points of connection for the Commonwealth, as much to that as it does to the Secretariat and education and health and all the rest of it. There's the question, as Carl has talked about, the implications of a kind of a new relationship, new partnerships, and not obviously only in the category of associated organisation. These categories, in my mind, are still slightly odd. There are some very obvious reputable organisations alongside Carl, but there are one or two other rather strange organisations in that category also. And I think that needs to be addressed, frankly. But also there are those organisations that are put in that category of CSO organisations who will want to know where their place is to be and how their work areas are likely to be addressed. And the question of joining up. And it seems to me that joining up is not just, it involves everything. I'm particularly interested in how the Foundation and the Secretariat are joining up in terms of their plans. If we take something like youth, for instance, I mean, it seems to me that participatory governance and young people is a particularly important connection. The Secretariat will have a particularly new emphasis, we gather, on youth. And of course, there are lots of youth organisations out there in the Commonwealth. How do they all connect up? I hope they will, that they do. So these are, to my mind, some of the issues that we might think about. So can I see those who would like to ask a question? Yes, sir.
What race equality systems are in place to protect black and non-white members of the Commonwealth Secretariat from the impact of white supremacist racists on the decision-making processes within the Commonwealth?
Okay, I'm going to take all the questions at the end. So if I could see Bala.
This is regarding joining up work. Recently, last year I was involved in organising for Commonwealth Association of Commonwealth University Summer School, Commonwealth Summer School, University of Cameroon. One of the things that came up there was the way the partnership can be brought together. And the organizations that were involved in putting up this particular event were not only Commonwealth organizations, but also European Union organizations, funding from the European Union and Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So in other words, I'm thinking that whether we're thinking about partnerships and working together, not just within the Commonwealth organizations, but also organizations outside. And politically, this again is very important because when you look at the activities from the point of view of particular countries, there are also members not only of Commonwealth but also of other regional as well as political organizations. If you take civil society organizations, for example, there is a recent trend of collaboration between India, South Africa, and Brazil as part of BRIC countries. So, how does Commonwealth relate to these developments?
Somebody else here before. Was it Karen? Yeah. Karen.
Thank you, Stuart. Firstly, I just want to take issue with Carl. There are a number of organisations that are pillars of democracy, excluding parliamentary communities such as our organisation. But we don't have the same status, it is true, as you do, and we are very jealous of that. Sorry, that was an aside. My main issue is related to the Commonwealth Secretariat's new strategic plan and the moves that have been described by the Secretary General and by Stuart to kind of be more a facilitator and a clearinghouse for programmes rather than deal with certain programmes themselves. I'm very worried that you want to do more in certain areas, but in the past, when we've said, oh well, we must do more programmes in, say, Cameroon to help democracy or help human rights or help develop the judiciary, we told that for a while, but we've run out of money. So how are you going to balance the issue of focusing too much on one country or another country versus the issue of dealing with the detail and the in-depth trading or any of that type of thing? Thank you.
And take two more, Mark and then Daisy. Can I do you in the next tranche? That's it. Yeah. Proximity on this occasion is video.
Mark Robinson, on a different hat, Commonwealth Consortium for Education. Just bringing the related agencies together with the Secretariat and the committee, all that is good stuff. I do think perhaps there's scope for more thought to be given how to blend Commonwealth associations into this process. Now, I know there's an enormous number around the table in Aldeburgh House when we have these regular biannual meetings. But the Secretary General, in a way, has gone further now by saying that he can see opportunities for Commonwealth associations to help in the programmatic work because of their strengths. And if that is really to take root, then I think there's got to be a stronger interconnection between, shall we say, the Commonwealth Association sitting on the outside with our mother, the Commonwealth Foundation, perhaps in one corner, with this whole process of the Secretariat and the related organisations. I know it's a hard one to achieve, but I think it needs some deep, careful and constructive and imaginative thought.
Thank you. Daisy?
I have a very straightforward question to Steve. It was good that the Commonwealth Foundation, when it did its strategic plan process, had a consultation period and invited submissions. Would the Commonwealth Secretariat consider maybe going further and producing a draft strategic plan whereupon organisations, particularly Commonwealth associated organisations, are invited to submit comments and observations, but also to identify areas where they are critical partners? That's a straightforward comment. By way of a little bit more recent explanation, Vijay invited me recently to speak at the Commonwealth Diplomats Induction Programme about the challenges that Commonwealth organisations face, and the point that I made there was that in our little bubble we all think that the Commonwealth's got a good brand, and actually in a lot of places it doesn't, and a lot of our organisations struggle because we are tarnished with all the baggage that the Commonwealth has. So each and every one of us has a vested interest in making sure that the Secretariat has a very good strategic plan. We don't want to hit you guys over the head, we want to give positive contributions, and the way for that to happen would be to open up the process so we can actually submit our comments, our views and our efforts and our money before the process is all a signed deal.
Okay, I'd like to pause at that point. We've got lots of time, and perhaps you'll lead off on the next tranche, but we've got lots of time, so let's at this stage just deal with those issues. Do you want to start, Vijay?
Sure. I think 2 points that I can comment on based on the questions. Firstly, working outside the Commonwealth. I think it's a good observation. So when we talk about deploying the Commonwealth brand outside the Commonwealth family, I think the way that the Foundation has responded to that is by engaging with other similar organisations. So we're in discussions at the moment with La Francophonie and the Organisation of Islamic Countries, for example, in exchanging information with them on the ways in which countries within those blocks engage with civil society. It's not that the Commonwealth has the last word on how to engage with civil society. Nevertheless, we feel we have something to learn from La Francophonie and OIC as well, in the ways in which they go about their kind of conceptual framework when it comes to engaging with civil society. It's gratifying that they feel that they have something to learn from the Commonwealth as well. The point that you made about the European Union, I think, is also a valuable point, not just for the purposes of engaging with the 3 member states, of course, but the mechanisms that the EU has a role in relating to, not least of all, the ACP group, for example. Quite a large block of countries. I was privileged to have been asked to address the ACP meeting of culture ministers in Brussels 3 weeks ago, to set out the importance of culture in a developmental frame, just to pick up one of the themes that Stuart raised. So I think we need to think a little tangentially about the ways in which we can deploy the Commonwealth brand. In terms of collaboration across the agencies, the Commonwealth is not a homogenous landscape, and I think you're right, Carl. Outside Martin, outside SW1, the Commonwealth is a blur. It's just one collection of assorted agencies. But actually, if you're going to coordinate, you need to be aware of the nuances and the different layers and the delineations of where one set of organisations starts and another set ends. But that's not to excuse or negate the need for that to happen. We need to get to grips with it. At an intergovernmental level, certainly, Secretary General and myself have had discussions about coordination, better coordination between the Foundation and the Secretariat. I think you'll find that's reflected certainly in our plan. But I think, from what I understand, it'll be reflected to some extent in the Secretariat, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. I think also we've included our colleagues in the Commonwealth of Learning in that discussion as well, because as the third of the intergovernmental organisations, they clearly need to be brought into the mix as well. Finding the moment and the appropriate level at which that coordination takes place is also important. It's not enough, I don't think, for the 3 principals of those organisations to have a chat every year. We need programmatic collaboration as well. That's how it's going to happen. Now, once that starts to happen, I'm convinced, and particularly given the narrative that Steve set out regarding the Secretariat strategic plan, regarding further engagement with the Commonwealth family, I'm convinced that programmatic discussion will also then provide a tangible opportunity, a moment for the Commonwealth Intergovernmental Family to engage with the broader Commonwealth family, Mark, as you suggest. In relation to education, I think the statement made by Commonwealth education ministers when they met in Mauritius this year, which made explicit reference to the importance of engaging with Commonwealth non-governmental organisations in taking forward a Commonwealth education agenda, is a real opportunity. And I was heartened to hear that a group of Commonwealth education accredited organisations have taken up that challenge and have had discussions with Secretariat colleagues on how those words could be translated into some kind of action. At least the beginnings of a discussion is taking place. So I think the seeds are there.
Just before we go, Vijay, could you just tell us very briefly about the Foundation's Equal Opportunity Policy?
Foundation's Equal Opportunity Policy. Okay. Foundation has a staff of 19 people, 10 of which are black. We have an equalities. We have a senior management group of 4 people. Senior management group is majority black. We've got an equal opportunities policy. Discrimination on any grounds is not sort of zero tolerance in the organisation. We have a grievance policy and a disciplinary policy that reflects that. We have a governing body of 46 member states plus 5 civil society representatives plus a representative of the Secretary General's office, and they oversee those policies. That's majority black.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you. Maybe I'll deal with that question now. I mean, I wasn't quite expecting that, to be honest, but I haven't gone around counting Secretary of Staff according to the colour of their skin. But, for instance, I know we have a very diverse mix. We have zero tolerance for racism. We also have a zero tolerance on accusations of racism that are not well founded. I can probably only talk for myself, but I've appointed 4 people who report to me. 2 of whom are black, 1 is Pakistani and 1 is Singaporean. So, but we also certainly have disciplinary procedures in place for dealing with any racism. It's absolutely zero tolerance. Maybe I wanted to that. Sorry?
You wanted to?
Absolutely. Now, moving on to the other questions, maybe I'll take up this one about Commonwealth associations, because I think Mark used some really good words here, which is we need deep, careful, constructive, and imaginative thought. And I think I totally agree with that. I think going forward, how we work with organisations is going to be absolutely key in the strategic plan, and it requires a tailored approach. We are working closely with the Foundation. The Eminent Persons Group recommended very wisely that we should look at learning from each other when it comes to governance systems, support systems, what have you, and that's exactly what we've done. And I've met with Vijay and his colleagues to share knowledge on the work that we've been doing, for instance, in our human resources policy, some of the changes we've made to allow remuneration policy and what have you. So that's committed. More broadly, I think we need to work with others, and I heard what Carl said about an MOU. I'm not necessarily a big fan of MOUs. I suspect that they become just new devices that people see as outcomes and then sit on the shelf. What matters really is the fact that you institutionalise and build into your processes systematic coordination where it's relevant, and that's something which my colleagues in SPED, Strategic Plan and Evaluation Division, have committed to taking forward, and indeed the whole collaboration is going forward. Maybe I'll link that to Daisy's question as she talks, I guess, the broader consultation. I'll be really frank with you, I doubt whether the draft strategic plan will be sent out for general comment. But what I do think we should do, and what I've done before, is as we develop the plan in much more detail, we should be working very closely with the ones who are most relevant, the ones who are actually we want to partner with in terms of helping to deliver our outcomes and what have you. I'm not sure, if I'm really honest, that a broad consultation where we put a plan out for everybody to comment will actually help us in our desperately needed aim of becoming more focused. So I'm not convinced that will move us in that direction, if I'm really frank. I pick up on the points about running out of money and being a facilitator and concerns. I would suggest in some ways the reason why this may have happened in the past might be because we're not so. We are perhaps very broadly spread, and therefore the pot of money is very, very limited. It's definitely more now focused on fewer issues. I think also the fact that we're priding ourselves, and it's quite notable, we prided ourselves in the Secretariat being very responsive to demand and demand-driven. I'm one of the people who believes that will always have its place when there's a need of member countries, desperate need, that we try and assist as best we can. But I actually believe we need to be more programmatic up front, more clear in terms of focusing our resources where we think we can make a difference. And that will mean that we will know better up front the areas which we can move forward with and fund those areas properly. I'm not going to say we'll never run out of money in there.
No, I was more focused on the countries.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure. I've not seen anything suggesting that we are going to develop in a more country focus as an organisation. I think what I would encourage people to do, I think if you want to make a difference, and the Secretary General once suggested the Secretary could like a fire engine, that there needs to be a ability to fire. Well, I suggest if that's the case, then you need to, if you're a very small fire engine, have not so much water, you need to focus that on specific areas. But I don't think that's true, it's just as an organisation. I think when we look at we're going to do work in specific policy areas and we do work on building capacity, I think there we might want to be focused on fewer countries. But that will be dependent upon personal need, exactly where we can make the most difference. What doesn't make sense to me is we spread ourselves so thinly geographically in any particular policy area.
Can I just pick you up on the MOU thing? You said you weren't keen on institutionalising it in that respect. I think the problem, I can see two problems with the current, even if described as systematic relationship. The first is the one that I think Karen highlighted in the last session, which is that even though you do have some kind of dialogue, you kind of fade in and out on a regular basis. I'm sure most organisations find that. Yeah. And I think the other one is if both the IGOs are moving to results-based management and so on, and greater partnership with Commonwealth organisations and civil society partners, it's also about standards on that side and about having the same systems of deliverance, isn't it? And so it's what the Secretariat will demand of its partners as much as what its partners will demand of the Secretariat. And it seems to me that an MOU is quite a reasonable way of structuring that relationship.
I agree with all of your aims and what you're saying. First of all, I would say I'm not claiming the status quo is the way to go. I think we actually need to have systematic engagement. On individual projects, we need to have great clarity about what the different partners are going to do. I guess what I'm sceptical about, because we've got quite a number of them in the Secretariat, is how useful MOUs, broad MOUs are, because they largely, because of their nature, they will cover many, many projects. If we were to do an MOU with COG, and I'm not going to rule it out, but my fear would be how we do it in a way that actually would be meaningful on projects and ground. It seems to me you need to have a more systematic approach on individual projects in areas, and within our system, something which automatically means that we go to the COGF and work with them on different ways and how we work on different projects. If an MOU will help that, I'm not going to reject it. I'm just aware that we've got not MOUs at the moment, but really, I'm not sure are very operational, and they're rather counter general wording, and people see them as an end in themselves, which they should never be. So I think it helps us.
Yeah.
Right, well, let me come in on the MOU issue and then come back. I think I'd like to say a few words about the external partnership question. I mean, I've just signed an MOU a few months ago with Helen Clark at UNDP.
We've got one of those.
And there's MOUs and MOUs. But it's had some real impact. My colleague Lucy Slack, Deputy in charge of programs, just come back from Johannesburg, where they've been having extensive discussions about a linked-up approach with UNDP and one of the other UN agencies, UNCDF, based on the MOU, which will operationalise our collaborative work in Southern Africa and SADC. And indeed, we hope marshal some external resources which currently not available. So I think, providing you use the MOU, and what I think we must get away from is just this very informal relationships based on individuals' links and personalities. I have a great relationship with Steve, and I have a great relationship with Amitabh, but we're not always necessarily going to be here. So I think it's important to institutionalise these things, have these things a bit more formal. So I would refute the idea that there isn't a value in an MOU providing it's taken forward concretely. On partnerships, certainly, obviously we do look within our own Commonwealth family. For example, we work very closely, a number of Commonwealth bodies, CYEP, on the youth side, on some youth issues. We're working with the Commonwealth Association of Planners, which of course is very closely related to local government. So we obviously have links within our own Commonwealth family. Again, I'm getting on the train to Brussels on 6 o'clock on Monday morning to go for a meeting there, which is trying to draw up a new EU communication as a policy instrument on local government. And we've been engaging with our members in Cyprus, because Cyprus currently holds the presidency of the EU, to influence that process further with other European countries which are non-Commonwealth. So we're influencing the EU policy-making process in particular areas of government. Of course, there's also potential resources there. We did another MOU, Stephen, with our Dutch partners, Dutch local government, who were beneficiaries with our help of a €6 million programme for local government in ACP countries, which we're doing in partnerships, and that's bringing some tangible benefits to our members. So that's an area where we're drawing, in this case, on about €6 million European money for work from a non-Commonwealth institution. So I think there are a lot of benefits in looking a bit beyond the strictly Commonwealth ambit. And finally, it's a little bit tangential, but I just want to throw this in. I do feel, maybe it's coming back to some discussion this morning, that sometimes the Commonwealth needs to be a bit more engaged beyond its own borders. I mean, the obvious case is Zimbabwe, which we all hope will come back into the Commonwealth, and where a number of Commonwealth organisations have been working very closely to re-engage Zimbabwe. But there's other cases, South Sudan, which has applied for membership, I think we should be engaging with. Again, we have a small EU-funded program in South Sudan where we're collaborating with an NGO in South Sudan. And indeed, just to give one other example, Burma, which I visited in April, which I think is now looking at a real engagement beyond its borders with some of its traditional partners in the Commonwealth, and where the situation was very much like South Africa was in 1990, when Mandela was released and the ANC was unbanned. There's 4 years to go until elections in Burma, and I think Commonwealth countries, especially in South Asia like India, should be very actively engaging with very strong leadership from Commonwealth bodies to help countries like Burma on the path to democracy in the same way as it helped South Africa on its path to democracy.
Thank you, Carl. Patsy. Can you speak up?
It's a deal.
Yeah, sorry.
I got the impression that you wouldn't finish this at a process of consultation. It would be about 18 months, which is as long as I think it takes another consultation. Some result. And if perchance, after this long period, it's decided that you're going to need, say, health or education, does that mean you're going to stop having the ministerial consultation meetings? That's the first question. The next question is to Vijay. Vijay, I'm a little bit swamped in all the kinds of things you're having. But you mentioned something about the Commonwealth book part that you wanted to change. May I ask why? Because that is one thing in the entire Commonwealth which gets very good publicity. It's part of the arts and culture. Why would you like to change the criteria?
Okay, Terry and then Terry.
Thank you very much. It's clearly very important to address the perception of the Commonwealth amongst governments, international organizations, civil society, business people, etc., etc. Now, I think it would be true to say that the Commonwealth is best known amongst the 2.4 billion citizens of the Commonwealth through the Commonwealth Games, though no mention hitherto at this meeting has been made of the Games, which I think is very important indeed. Now, what actions are proposed to utilise the Commonwealth Games to make the Commonwealth more generally known for what it is and for what it does?
Thank you very much, Terry.
I'm from the Australian High Commission, and I was an inductee, that's an appropriate term, in the induction program was referred to. Up until the induction program, CAB in Commonwealth circles to me meant Commonwealth Advisory Bureau. But then I heard Daisy's very insightful, very provocative presentation, and now CAB means Canada, Australia, Britain, and New Zealand. And I keep on thinking back to the dichotomy. The dichotomy, one see as a clear dichotomy. And I must say, I keep telling myself, no, the dichotomy does not exist. But out of default, I've sat on, represented Sierra Leone as a governor in meeting after meeting in the CMAC. And whenever the difficult questions seem to arise, the commissioner, funding, I was at that meeting today, the strategic plan, the CAB, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and New Zealand seems to come to the fore. A long preface to a very short question. I worry that maybe we're making light of, and Steve made light of his distinction, because clearly the non-CAB were very vocal about where they stood and where the strat plan should go. And it seems as if the other side was saying something different. I'm just wondering, how are we going to bring them together, and can you say something about that kind of, does it exist?
Okay, final comment.
Well, maybe a couple of things. The infantile gestation period for the strategic plan, I guess all I can say is that I think to some extent, as I said a few minutes ago, that the period was, I guess the EPG period is partly responsible, but not so completely. Health and education, and I was actually going to build a little bit on the last comment from Sierra Leone. I think there is some misunderstanding around the health and education, that somehow this completely disappears from the programme of the Secretariat. That is not the Secretariat's intention. And in fact, I met with him after this morning's meeting, and he deliberately didn't answer a lot of the points. I think he wanted to reflect on what the members said. I think the messages were very clear, but I think there is also some real misunderstanding about what's being proposed. I think people are looking at the words on the page, and there are some misinterpretations. And so what the Secretary General intends to do is to set out very clearly, I understand, in a letter next week to members, the importance that health and education will continue to have in the role of not just the Commonwealth, but even the Secretariat, but where we can make a difference, of what it is we can do that actually uses the strengths of the Commonwealth in those areas, which may not be, in my mind, but it's up to the Secretary, may not be doing what the other agencies do, who have vast resources. We have to think about what it is uniquely we can do. I can certainly say that, the Secretary General and all the others, we're very alert. We're aware that members want different things in the organisation. We hear certain things being said by certain countries and others, what have you. At the end of the day, we believe in one Commonwealth that has to be a balanced programme that meets the needs and the desires of the membership as a whole. But it must be a programme where we're making a difference. It's no good as continuing to do work on an issue because it's deemed as important. If it's important, fine. If we can make a real difference uniquely ourselves in that area, that's what we should be doing, and that's what we have to hunt and search around and work with members to do. Because otherwise, and it's not just the big countries, it's the small ones, and it's countries like Rwanda, the newest member that's given this message consistently. You carry on doing such a broad programme, you carry on doing things on an activity basis, but you're not able to show the difference you're making. What's the point? And if it's so it's not just the ABCs or whatever. So I think I heard that very clearly. So the education health ministerials will continue. The ministerials will continue on health and education in the new strategic plan. That is proposed.
Vijay? Thanks. Two questions that perhaps I can comment on. One, the book prize. Commonwealth Writers' Prize needs to differentiate itself. There's a vast landscape of prizes for literature. We were able to secure funding and sponsorship for the Commonwealth Book Prize. That sponsorship ran out 2 years ago. So that was an opportunity to reimagine the book prize with a view to getting a new sponsor in. We started making the changes last year. They're not huge changes, but they are significant. It means that now the book prize is only winnable by the new authors. So the whole aim of the prize now is for awarding prizes for the best first book, to encourage new entrants to the world of literature. The winner this year, Shihan Karunatilafa, a fantastic book if you get a chance to read it, called Chinaman. It's not just the story of left arm unorthodox wrist spinning. It's also the story of the role of cricket in Sri Lanka and the search for this elusive left arm googly bowler. Shihan was able to come to London this week. He met with Her Majesty yesterday, not as part of the Writers' Prize, but as part of the RCS student time capsule. So there are lots of similarities, but we've aimed to build on the old, to differentiate a Commonwealth product in what is a crowded landscape. Another book that was shortlisted last year, The Sly Company of People Who Care, based in Guyana. Excellent read, I have to say. Anyway, the Commonwealth Games in 2009, heads of government in their communique in Trinidad and Tobago, paragraph 111, made a recommendation that the Games be, that the Commonwealth Foundation be given responsibility for convening a cultural festival. We responded to that by undertaking a feasibility study on how practical it would be to undertake such a festival on a regular basis, and the feasibility study concluded that it would be best to hitch that cultural festival wagon to a Commonwealth Games start. So we are in discussions with our colleagues in Scotland about how we can, within the resources available, convene something cultural in the wings of the 2014 Games at the moment.
Carl.
Yeah, two brief comments. First of all, very pleased that the next Commonwealth Games are being hosted by one of my member organisations, Glasgow. So it's nice to see local government hosting the Commonwealth Games, as they tend to do. But I do agree that it's another opportunity for joined up approaches, and it comes back to this theme I was trying to hammer away at, a more joined up approach, whether it's Commonwealth Games Federation and the foundation, which is created here, or indeed local governments or whatever. But maybe just one final comment. Like some other colleagues in the room, I've worked for Commonwealth in various incarnations for the best part of 30 years, and in those 30 years there's been lots of ups and downs and crises and confrontations and threats of countries leaving and some have left and some coming. I think we are facing a different scale of a problem at the moment, and that's the crisis a bit related to the international economic situation, the financial meltdown since 2008. And that's something that's threatening international cooperation per se, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the European Union, where instead of the British government's position is ridiculous, or whether there's, I can say these things a bit undiplomatically, where there's, other international bodies whose existence is being threatened. And I think the Commonwealth is particularly vulnerable because of all the the issues we've been discussing today because of the limited resources. And I think the present time is a very fragile one for international bodies like the Commonwealth, which makes it all the more important to have this very heart-eating review and reform.
Thank you, Ed. And just a final question to Steve from me. Steve, sport in the strategic plan and meetings of sports ministers, that you expect there still to be continuing in place?
I'll have to check, but I think that is indeed the case. I think that sport was something in fact we've introduced more into the work programme, which has been right alongside our youth programme, and I'll have to check the detail, but I can go surprised if that was going to disappear, as the Secretary General has highlighted himself the importance he attaches to this. I'm looking to hopefully haven't going to nod that this is his understanding as well. So I haven't got that one.
Smiling diplomatically. Encouraging me. Right, that brings us to 2:45, which is the time to conclude the session. So I want to thank all our panellists. I think we've had a very frank.